Okay, so you guys have sent in a ton of really interesting articles lately, and it seems like there's just so much going on right now in the federal government. So what we're going to try to do today is really take a deep dive into all of these things and hopefully connect some dots for you
Absolutely.
and, kind of save you some time because it really is,
There's a lot.
it's a lot to keep up with. And so what I'm seeing, I think one of the major themes that sort of jumps out at me
Yeah,
is just how much change is happening on like so many different fronts.
totally. And that was my immediate reaction as well, just seeing the sheer breadth of activity taking place, from hiring to workplace policies to the whole relationship between the government and its unions to restructuring
Yeah.
in major departments. And then, of course, this huge push towards AI adoption.
Yeah, and I think that's where I kind of want to start because one of the first things that caught my eye was this whole thing with the GSA
Oh,
and the fact that their
good.
Federal Acquisition Service, it looks like they're getting ready to do some serious hiring. And on the one hand, we keep hearing about, workforce reductions and this and that.
Right.
But this is, they're listing positions for contract specialists,
Yeah.
GS 12 and GS 13 levels, and
Yeah.
supervisory contract specialists, GS 14 and 15. So, I
Right.
mean, that could be, we're talking potentially up to 1,000 new employees
Yeah.
in different
In
locations.
different locations.
So that's that.
Yeah, that is really interesting, particularly
Why?
because it begs the question, why such a focused hiring push in this one area
Mm-hmm.
when there are reports of cuts elsewhere within the agency,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Why this
Yeah.
huge investment in contracting?
Well, the article does point to a potential connection
Yeah.
to the Trump administration's goal of centralizing the procurement of common goods and services within the GSA.
Okay.
And so if that's the case, these new hires, especially at those mid to senior levels,
Yeah.
would be absolutely essential for handling the increased workload and responsibilities that come with running a more centralized system.
Right. And just managing all those contracts.
Exactly. And what I think is really fascinating here is the very specific nature of this hiring.
Yes.
It's not just like a general increase across the board. It's very targeted and focused on roles directly involved in
Yeah. Procurement.
procurement and contract management.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And it is interesting because the article also mentions this thing about the GSA setting a May deadline for
Yeah.
potential further reductions in staff.
Okay.
And this would be through
So you got the
through both layoffs and incentives.
layoffs on one hand and then
Yeah.
new hires on the other.
So it seems like
It's not as simple as just expanding or shrinking.
it seems like a reshuffling.
It's more like a strategic reshuffling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where you're building up contracting expertise
Right.
in one part of the agency while potentially downsizing in others.
Yeah. Very strategic.
Yeah. And I think this really highlights how dynamic government agencies can be,
Yeah.
especially when there are shifts in administration and priorities. Objectives change, resources are reallocated,
Yeah.
and personnel is a key part of that.
Right.
So it could also point to a potential long-term shift in how the government approaches its purchasing overall, favoring a more consolidated model overseen by the GSA.
Right.
Now, a centralized contracting system like that could lead to benefits like greater negotiating power,
Yes.
but it might also mean less flexibility for individual agencies
Yeah, that's a good point.
and potentially impact smaller or more specialized vendors.
Okay, so moving on to another area where we're seeing quite a bit of movement. It looks like the Department of the Air Force has actually reversed its policy regarding the use of personal pronouns in official communications.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, and so they're now aligning with the 2023 Defense Policy Bill, which essentially says that the Pentagon cannot mandate or forbid the use of pronouns.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a policy seesaw
Yeah.
going back and forth.
Yeah, what do you think is going on there?
Well, I think if we connect this to the bigger picture, the initial ban on pronouns originated from a Trump administration executive order
Right.
that linked trip readiness with restrictions on individuals with gender dysphoria
Yeah.
and what it termed shifting pronoun usage.
Yeah, interesting.
So this reversal really seems to reflect a legislative response
Mm-hmm.
to that earlier policy,
Yeah.
emphasizing individual autonomy and communication within professional standards.
Mm.
So it raises a question about the interplay between executive directives
Right.
and broader legislative mandates in shaping these workplace norms?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think,
And it makes you wonder, like,
it makes you wonder, is this Congress pushing back against executive overreach in personnel matters?
right, could we see more of this?
And, speaking of pushback,
Hmm.
I think we have to talk about some of the legal challenges that have emerged recently.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
we are seeing, quite a bit of pushback against certain actions taken by the Trump administration, particularly concerning federal unions and
Okay.
also the legal community.
So these legal challenges, I think, are really important indicators of the tensions that can arise between the executive branch and these other entities.
Right.
So, for example, the National Treasury Employees Union, the NTU,
Hmm.
has filed a lawsuit seeking a preliminary injunction against that executive order that aims to terminate most agency union contracts,
Right.
citing national security concerns.
And their argument is that
Right. And their argument is that it's absurdly broad,
Mhm.
which I thought was really striking.
it is they're basically saying it violates existing federal law.
Exactly. They're saying it's overreach.
Yeah, and it's not just them, right?
No, it's not just the NTEU. We've also got a coalition of federal unions
Right.
that have filed a separate lawsuit against the same executive order,
Yeah.
and they're arguing that it violates the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act
Right.
and impacts over 1 million federal employees.
Yeah, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, across most agencies.
Yeah, so it seems like a real
It's a massive scope.
Yeah, and also, kind of a fundamental conflict.
Yeah, and it really highlights that fundamental tension
Yeah.
between executive authority and the rights of federal employees to engage in collective bargaining.
Right.
The unions are clearly saying that these actions undermine established labor relations frameworks
Right.
and infringe upon their legal rights.
What do we think what could be some of the long-term consequences?
Well, the outcomes of these lawsuits could have substantial long-term consequences
Yeah.
for the relationship between the government and its workforce.
Yeah.
It really could set a precedent.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit, we also saw some interesting news coming out of Department of Homeland Security, or DHS.
Oh, okay.
And they're apparently planning some pretty significant cuts to their headquarters workforce. And I'm talking about a 50% reduction
Wow.
in their management directorate staff.
50%.
So this includes
Okay.
positions like the chief financial officer, the chief information officer, and the chief procurement officer.
Got it.
And it even impacts the relatively recently formed AI Corps.
Really? So they're cutting.
Yeah, I mean, this seems...
That seems like a huge shift within the agency.
Yeah.
50% reduction in management.
Yeah.
Including the AI Corps.
Including the AI Corps.
Yeah.
That's like...
It makes you wonder what the long-term impact on their ability to activate would be.
Right, and just function on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly. The sheer scale of this planned reduction,
Yeah.
especially targeting these leadership roles in these emerging areas like AI,
Yeah.
it does suggest a major restructuring effort at DHS.
Yeah. What do you think is driving this?
It's hard to say for certain,
Yeah.
but the fact that the Customer Experience Directorate is also facing cuts,
Right.
that indicates a potential shift in priorities
Yeah.
related to how the agency interacts with the public as well.
So what becomes of all those people and their expertise
That's a great
and the
question.
projects they're working on?
Yeah. What happens to that institutional knowledge and the
Mhm.
ongoing projects within these directorates?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
seems like a move with potentially far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, and I think, contrasted with what we were just talking about with the GSA,
Right.
it paints a very strange picture of the federal workforce strategy.
It's a very uneven landscape.
Yeah, and so we're seeing a lot of, activity from the legal community as well, pushing back on some of these things. And we're seeing that
Yeah.
over 500 law firms have signed onto a court brief
Wow.
opposing President Trump's recent executive orders
Okay.
that target parts of the legal profession.
So this is related to the lawsuit filed by the law firm Perkins Coie. Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so the demands outlined in the executive order, they include things like suspending security clearances,
Okay.
terminating federal contracts, and restricting employee access to federal buildings.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds really disruptive.
Yeah.
And to see such a unified front from the legal community,
It's huge, right?
it's huge. And it really underscores the potential gravity of these executive orders.
It feels like a challenge.
It feels like a direct challenge
Yeah, a direct challenge.
to the administration's authority
Yeah.
and a significant mobilization within the legal field.
Oh, okay, so kind of shifting gears a little bit,
Hmm?
I want to talk about this Air Force Deferred Resignation Program.
Okay.
So they've released further guidance on this, and it seems like they're actively encouraging broad participation,
Okay.
along with the Voluntary Early Retirement Authority. but there are some specific categories of employees
Yeah.
who are not eligible for these programs.
Gotcha.
So what do you think about this program?
Well, it seems like the Air Force is actively using these programs as a mechanism for managing workforce changes.
Right.
And the list of ineligible employees, which includes non-appropriated fund employees, foreign local national employees,
Yeah.
dual status military technicians, child care and youth program employees,
Right.
and flight instructors, that suggests a very targeted approach,
Yeah.
likely aimed at retaining personnel in essential operational or support roles.
Yeah. So they're trying to keep certain people.
Yeah. And the fact that they're considering additional exemptions after the initial application period closes also indicates a degree of flexibility in their workforce management strategy.
Yeah. And it's interesting that they are so actively, campaigning
Right.
for participation in this program.
It makes you think about what their workforce management objectives really are.
Yeah.
Are they aiming to downsize in certain areas while making sure they retain specific skill sets
Yeah.
that are considered critical?
Yeah. And I think this program, in conjunction with, the potential layoffs at GSA and these big cuts at DHS.
Yeah, it paints a really complex picture
Yeah, it really does.
of the overall federal workforce strategy.
Okay. And then finally, I think we need to talk about this big push toward AI.
Yeah.
This is something that has really kind of
Accelerated.
accelerated recently.
Yeah, it feels like they've really stepped on the gas.
Yeah, and the Office of Management and Budget, they've been issuing all this new guidance, and then the Department of Energy is identifying potential locations for AI data centers.
Oh, wow. Well,
So it seems like they're,
so the OMB has this new AI and acquisition memo, right?
Yeah,
And it tasks the GSA with developing 2 new tools
right.
to help agencies buy AI technologies.
Yeah, and I think this is really important because we've talked before about how procurement can be a real barrier to
It's a
innovation.
huge barrier.
So what are these tools?
So the first tool is a guide for the acquisition workforce,
Okay.
and it covers all the relevant authorities, different acquisition approaches, and contract vehicles.
Okay.
And then the second tool is an online repository
Okay.
where agencies can share information and resources related to AI acquisition.
Okay, so they're trying to break down some of those silos.
Exactly. They're trying to streamline and promote the adoption of AI across the federal government.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really proactive approach
Or
to tackling the acquisition challenges that come with these rapidly evolving technologies.
yeah. So basically, the White House is giving all federal agencies these clear deadlines and instructions to use AI.
Yeah, to ramp up their use of AI.
Yeah.
From figuring out how to buy it to setting rules for how it can be used responsibly.
And then we've got, the Energy Department identifying 16 federal sites as potential locations for these powerful AI data centers.
Right, with the goal of starting construction by the end of 2027.
Yeah.
That's a sign of some serious investment,
Yeah, that's not messing around.
not messing around.
Yeah.
And they've even requested feedback from data center developers, energy firms, and the public by April 20th.
Yeah, so they're trying to be inclusive in this process.
Exactly. It seems like they want to collaborate and build broader support for these initiatives.
Right.
And it's not surprising, considering
Yeah.
the administration's focus on both AI and energy production.
Right.
Those are 2 big priorities.
Right.
So to see them kind of combined in this way.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense.
And then we've got, this 25-page memo from OMB
Oh, wow. Okay.
outlining 10 new deadlines related to AI
For all federal agencies.
for all federal agencies. And this includes
Yeah.
a requirement to develop a generative AI policy
Okay.
by early December that
Mhm.
sets terms for acceptable use and safeguards.
Gotcha.
And then also they have to create a strategy by early October to remove bureaucratic barriers to responsible AI adoption.
So move quickly, but thoughtfully.
Yeah, I mean, it's a clear directive to move quickly,
Yeah.
but also thoughtfully.
Yeah, that early December deadline for the generative AI policy, I think, shows a real focus
Right.
on establishing clear guidelines and safeguards
Yeah.
as this technology becomes more widespread.
Yeah, very interesting.
It's really critical that they're emphasizing both accelerating adoption and establishing frameworks for responsible use at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think the requirement to identify and eliminate those bureaucratic obstacles by early October could be a really significant step towards fostering innovation within these agencies.
It shows that they understand that existing processes might get in the way
Right.
of effectively implementing these new technologies.
Yeah. So it seems
A
like,
lot of activity.
yeah, a lot of activity.
Exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. It's,
A little overwhelming.
it's a little overwhelming, but I think it is exciting.
Yeah.
So if we kind of step back and look at all these different pieces together, we've got this targeted hiring at GSA,
Right.
but workforce reductions in other areas,
Yeah.
these legal battles challenging executive actions,
Brilliant.
and then this very determined push towards widespread AI adoption.
What do you think are the main interconnected themes that are emerging from all of this?
Oh, I think one of the big themes is workforce management, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it seems like there's a significant reshaping of the federal workforce happening in response to, evolving priorities.
Yeah, and the second theme that really stands out to me is the ongoing tension and legal challenges
Yeah.
surrounding the scope of executive authority, particularly when it comes to things like labor practices
Right.
and the legal profession.
And then, of course, this third big theme is AI.
Yeah, the push for AI is undeniable.
It really is. They're really going all in on this.
They're going all in on AI,
Yeah.
and I think it's really smart that they're building the infrastructure
Yeah.
and providing a roadmap for adoption.
Yeah. So each one of these, news stories that we've talked about, it's almost like a little window.
Yeah, a little glimpse.
Yeah, into this
into the broader picture.
broader picture of what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. And it reinforces this idea that to really understand what's going on in the federal government,
Right.
we have to look beyond those individual headlines
Yeah.
and consider those underlying forces and priorities
Right.
that are driving these seemingly diverse actions.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder what kind of federal government.
Like, what does it all add up to?
Are these actions building?
It's a fascinating question.
Yeah. I don't know if we have the answer.
Well, and I think the key thing to remember is that these are ongoing stories.
Right.
The legal challenges will continue to unfold in the courts.
Yeah.
The full impact of these workforce reductions
Right.
and the AI adoption will become clearer over time,
Yeah.
and we'll probably see further developments
No,
in
is that-
all of these areas.
Yeah. It's a very dynamic situation.
It is, so we have to stay tuned
Yeah, we do.
and keep analyzing.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with me into all of this. I think it's been really interesting.
Yeah, me too.
And hopefully you've all learned a lot.
I hope so.
And we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on how these stories develop in the future.
Sounds good.
Okay, talk to you guys later.
See ya.